On my 20th birthday, my mother told me, "Grow up and get out." They threw me out with the coldest note, so I decided she'd pay for every word. Can you imagine waking up on your 20th birthday, not to cake and presents, but to cold water splashed on your face and your own mother telling you to man up and move out? But that wasn't even the cruelest part. That came later, when I discovered everything I believed about my father's death was a lie. It was my 20th birthday, and my mom was literally splashing cold water on my face. She said, "It's time to man up and move out." I opened my eyes, and there was my stepdad standing right next to a pile of my belongings, which he'd just dumped by the doorway. They'd always been tough, even cruel, but this was a new low. My mom just kind of mused, "They've always been cruel, but I never expected this. But I'm your son." My stepdad just nodded, his face unmoving. He said, "You've been nothing but a burden since your dad died, wasting our money on therapy, crying about nightmares. And then, we kept you fed and housed for 20 years. That's more than most would do." Before I could even process what was happening, they shoved my things into my arms and practically forced me out the door. Honestly, I didn't even fight back. I think a part of me just gave up. After hours of just wandering, trying to meditate, even cuddling some stray kittens I found, I ended up at a city homeless shelter. My hands were trembling as I filled out the intake paperwork, just trying to hold myself together. Then my phone buzzed. They'd unblocked me, not to apologize, not to explain, but to twist the knife even deeper. My stepdad's text flashed across the screen. "At least your dad had the decency to die in Afghanistan," followed by that stupid facepalm emoji. That was it. I broke. Right there on that hard plastic chair, I just crumbled sobbing. An exhausted counselor, a woman with kind eyes, came over and gently stroked my shoulder. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked. I just showed her the texts. As she read, she glanced at my intake form, and her whole body just stiffened. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly different, almost strained. "Jackson Brooks, your father died in Afghanistan." "Yeah, I managed to choke out. When I was 7. She gripped her desk. "Did you ever see the body? Attend a burial?" I gasped. "Excuse me, Liam." My name. She used my name. "Did anyone from the military ever visit after, checking on you?" I mumbled. Not really. No, I don't know." "Wait, why are you asking me this?" Her fingers flew across her Chromebook for what felt like an eternity. After barely a minute, her face went utterly white. She looked at me, dead serious. "Liam, your father didn't die in Afghanistan." My chest seized up. "What?" "He's at Palmer V, a psychiatric ward. He's been there for 10 years. The fluorescent lights above suddenly felt blinding. Too bright, too harsh. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We had a funeral. I went to grief therapy for years." She just stared into my eyes. "You need to see your father today, before your parents realize you know." Suddenly, all these tiny, confusing pieces of my life started to click. Mom always getting worried about military families on TV. Why we moved states so quickly after the funeral. I wanted to just break down again, but my stepdad's words about me being young and a burden echoed in my head. No, not this time. I took a deep, shaky breath and said, "Why today?" Because when, not if, when my parents find out I know Dad's alive, they'll realize someone is after their benefits. She drove me to Palmer. The whole trip, my mind just rejected what was happening. It was impossible. Entering the VA hospital, we walked down a long corridor that reeked of floor wax and stale pharmaceuticals. And then he was there. Not my stepdad, who used to hit me, or Mom's other hidden boyfriends, who'd try to charm me with old vinyls. My real father. My loving father. Dad. I choked out a weak, fragile sound. His face crumbled as he turned. "Liam," he whispered, "they told me I'd never see you again. They told me you hated me. I thought you were dead." It was so hard to breathe. I went to your funeral, I told him, tears welling. Mom said you died a hero. Pain twisted his face. They told me you knew the truth and chose them. Just as my brain was completely dissociating from reality, my phone buzzed again. A notification. My parents had drained my college funds, my birthday money, everything. My life was a lie, and now I was broke. Account closed. I dropped the phone. Dad saw the screen. All my combat pay went to you, he whispered, his voice raspy. Every month for 10 years for your future. I never saw a penny. A doctor walked in then, a kind-faced woman. Mr. Brooks has been ready for discharge for years, she explained, but he's disabled from the war. He needs family to release him to someone who will take care of him. Without even thinking, I answered instantly. I'll do it. I'll take care of him. The next morning was just surreal. Dad walked out of that hospital wearing regular clothes, pants, a loose flannel. But as we got closer to my mom and stepdad's house, his breathing got shallow fast. 10 years, he muttered, his voice barely audible. 10 years they stole from us. We stopped right at the front door, the same door they'd shoved me out of yesterday. I heard footsteps inside. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened, and there was my stepdad. For a second, I almost laughed. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, like he'd seen a corpse. Then Mom appeared behind him, and her coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the white tile, staining it brown. Dad just grinned, a slow, chilling grin. Hello, David, he said. We need to talk about my death benefits. My stepdad's face went through 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, then a strange, calculating fury. His cheeks turned crimson. Mom choked, and that coffee mug smashing felt beautiful, like their whole web of lies was breaking apart with the pottery. David immediately started shouting, yelling that we couldn't just show up, that we were trespassing, making crazy accusations. He got louder and louder. Mom, though she was quick, almost impressively quick, if she wasn't so messed up. Her entire face softened with a fake, worried concern. She asked Dad with phony, anxious eyes if he was taking his pills. She pretended to be confused about what was happening, speaking gently, like he was a bewildered child. I felt my hand instinctively drop to my pocket. Before I even consciously decided, I'd launched the camera app on my phone. I kept it low, by my side, but tilted just enough to catch everything, microphone on. I just kept my face neutral, let them talk. After about 30 seconds, David's eyes zeroed in on my phone. His hand shot out, reaching for it. But Dad, despite his hand still shaking, stepped between us. David paused. He peered past Dad to a neighbor getting mail down the street. His expression shifted again. He backed off. I just kept recording. Mom then suggested we sit down and discuss calmly inside. Dad's breathing changed again. Fast. Shallow. I saw his chest heaving too quickly. I remembered his glazed, distant eyes from the hospital. He was deteriorating. Right then, I made a decision. We came to send a message, and that message was received. I touched Dad's arm. We're going, I told him. He just nodded, not speaking. We turned, walked back to the car. I could feel Mom and David's eyes burning into us from the doorway. As I helped Dad into the passenger seat, he just stared at his hands, still shaking. I got into the driver's seat, trying to figure out what to do next. Then it hit me. The shelter counselor. She'd given me her direct number. I called her immediately, no time for questions. Just told her what happened. She offered a 1-night lodging voucher from an emergency fund, gave me the address and told me to find the manager. I thanked her and hung up. Dad was still, just staring at his hands, like they belonged to someone else. I started the car. To the motel. It took 25 minutes. Dad didn't speak the whole way. The weight of being the only thing between him and a complete collapse felt like a boulder on my chest. The Sunset Inn motel had a parking lot, a roadway, but definitely no sunset view. The manager handed us the keys to room 107 without a word. The room reeked of old cigarettes and cleaning spray. 2 brown-covered mattresses. A scratched desk by the window. I spread everything out on that desk. Dad's Palmer discharge papers. The birth certificate I'd managed to grab from my room before they kicked me out. Screenshots of Mom and David's texts. The bank notification about my depleted account. I arranged it all in neat rows. It was a small thing, but arranging it, putting it in order, somehow made me feel like I wasn't drowning quite as much. I photographed everything with my phone. Then, from the edge of the bed, I dialed the number on the bank notification. The fraud department. They put me on hold for 10 minutes. Finally, someone answered. I started explaining the whole nightmare. The person on the line informed me that my college savings account had been closed just yesterday morning. All the money gone into an account I couldn't access. She suggested reporting it to the police. I'd need proof the money was mine. I asked, my voice barely a whisper, how am I supposed to prove that when I'm homeless and barely surviving? She lowered her voice, acknowledged how difficult it was, but said these were the necessities. She gave me a case number and told me to call back after I got a police report. My hand shook as I scribbled the number on the hotel notepad. Dad spoke then, for the first time since we'd left the house. He said when he enlisted, he'd set up an allotment, his combat pay, directly for his family. He didn't understand the technicalities. He just wanted us taken care of in case something happened to him. His voice was heavy with guilt, and my throat tightened. He thought I'd been getting money for college all along. I told him I'd never seen a penny. He put his face in his hands. Seeing that, it shattered me. This veteran, imprisoned for 10 years, lost a son, felt bad because he tried to help me and it had been stolen. I wanted to fix it, but I couldn't find the words. I just sat on the bed with him until his breathing settled. Next, I backed up my phone to the cloud. It took an hour. That shelter counselor had taught me. Documentation was key when you're up against opponents with more resources. I created a folder. Evidence. I uploaded screenshots of every text, that voice recording from their porch, every document on that desk. I saved it all in 3 separate places. My phone storage, Google Drive, email drafts. If my phone got stolen, if Mom and David tried to delete something, I wouldn't lose this. Every snapshot, every click, felt like a tiny layer of protection. They couldn't erase these files. The next morning, we were back at Palmer, Virginia. Dad needed an updated ID, and I needed his benefits history. We found this woman, the discharge coordinator, probably in her 50s, reading glasses dangling from a chain around her neck. She was helpful, but she moved like a human paper processing machine, typing Dad's responses with 2 fingers, printing forms for him to sign. She said the ID would take 3 weeks. 3 weeks, but the benefits history, thankfully, would be ready that afternoon. I sat there in the plastic chair, forcing myself to be patient. Inside, my head was screaming that we needed answers faster, that Mom and David were probably concealing money or deleting documents every single day. But I stayed quiet. I waited. She finally finished the forms, gave us a number to call for the prince later. We thanked her and left. In the car, Dad said he was exhausted. I took us back to the hotel, and he fell asleep almost instantly. I sat at the desk, looking at all the papers I'd collected, the materials we'd ordered. We'd taken the first steps. We challenged them. We started documenting everything. We started reclaiming Dad's identity. It wasn't enough, not really, but it was something. Something felt a whole lot better than 3 days ago, waking up to cold water in my face. The next morning, I found the VA benefits number in the documents and called it. For transfers later, I was stuck on hold with 1987-style elevator music. I put the phone on speaker while I organized more paperwork. 25 minutes passed, then 50. The same 30-second loop of music. Dad woke up, went to the restroom. Finally, a woman asked for Dad's SN. I read it off his discharge papers. When I started asking about aid, I mumbled something about representative payees and power of attorney. She was incredibly patient, started over. She explained that a representative payee manages benefits for someone who can't, and they have to apply and be authorized by the VA. And yes, someone had been receiving Dad's benefits under that arrangement for years. I asked who, and she said she couldn't give me that information over the phone without specific permission. I felt so silly, drowning in all these acronyms, POA, RP, Vero, unfamiliar terms. My hands were shaking. My writing was messy as I grabbed the hotel notepad, trying to jot everything down. She explained that changing a representative payee would require me to complete documents and Dad to be examined. After an hour on the phone, my brain was completely full of facts I barely understood. I called the shelter counselor, told her about the VA call. She immediately suggested linking me with Adult Protective Services. She thought my parents might be financially exploiting a disabled veteran. I hesitated. For years, Mom had drilled it into me that government agencies were traps, that they made things worse, that they couldn't be trusted. The counselor must have sensed my silence because she said, "Sometimes the system is your only defense." I thought about it. The system had found Dad before I even knew to look. And with no money, no home, I couldn't fight Mom and David alone. "Okay," I said. She gave me a name, Lucas Gray. Said he was skilled at these kinds of problems. I jotted down his details. Thanked her. Before that call, I tried something else. I dug through my old phone contacts, looking for family numbers I barely remembered. Aunts, uncles, cousins from before we moved states. Most numbers were disconnected. I left 3 voicemails outlining what had happened, just asking if they'd heard from me. 2 rings went unanswered. I called my mom's sister, Aunt Lisa. On the 4th ring, she answered. I barely got out my name before she interrupted. Mom had already told her I was lying to make them look bad. She refused to get involved in family issues. I tried to tell her Dad was alive, but she cut me off again. "You should be grateful," she snapped. "Instead of causing trouble, your mom lost her husband and raised you alone." Then she hung up. I just sat there, staring at my phone. It became painfully clear. Mom had isolated herself for years, making sure no one could challenge her story or support me if I ever found out. Later, after Dad went to bed, I opened a new document on my phone. I wrote down everything I could remember. Dad's reported death, age 7 at the top, then a list of everything that followed. Moving states within months of the funeral. Mom's fear whenever military families appeared on TV. How she'd quickly change the subject if I ever asked about Dad's service or photos. How she tossed out most of his items during the relocation because it hurt too much. How we never visited his grave. Then I wrote about my therapy sessions, sobbing over losing him, the years of nightmares. Mom had used my sadness to control me, make me feel guilty for being sad. Writing it all out revealed the patterns. It wasn't just one lie. It was a carefully constructed, decade-long edifice of deceit, all designed to prevent me from asking the right questions. At midnight, my phone lit up. A text from Mom. "We can chat," it said, "if you stop spreading stories and bad-mouthing me to neighbors." Apparently, people asking questions embarrassed her. "You're being emotional," she wrote. "We can resolve this if you calm down and come home." I read it 3 times. My thumb hovered over the reply button, frozen. I stared at that message for 25 minutes. Part of me, the furious part, wanted to type back everything I felt, every ounce of rage. But I knew that's what she wanted. She wanted me to talk, so she could twist my words, drive me mad. Instead, I screenshotted the text, uploaded it to my evidence folder. Then, I just placed my phone face down on the desk without replying. The next morning, Dad slowly ate the free motel meal I'd brought back. I thought we needed to talk about boundaries, about safety. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, like he expected more terrible news. Told him Mom and David might call. and he couldn't tell them where we were staying or what we were doing. He just nodded, silent. I pressed on. They might try to convince you I lied, or that I left you again, I said, my voice firm. You can't let them know anything, no matter what. He agreed, but the worry in his eyes was heartbreaking. It was the same dread I'd seen in Palmer, the fear that I might abandon him. I reached across the small table and grabbed his arm. I won't leave, I promised him. I mean it. We're going to solve this, together. His shoulders visibly relaxed, and he resumed eating. That afternoon, I had a legal aid appointment. The office was in a strip mall, sandwiched between a tax preparer and a nail salon. Inside, it smelled like old coffee and copier toner. Sophia Williams was waiting for me in a tiny office. She looked maybe 30, with black hair pulled back and glasses that made her seem younger. She shook our hands, invited us to sit. She opened a yellow legal pad and told me to start from the beginning. I told her everything. Waking up to cold water, the shelter counselor finding Dad, the confrontation on the porch, the drained bank accounts. She never interrupted, just made crisp, careful notes, nodding sometimes. When I finished, she looked up. We may sue for fraud and conversion, she said, explaining that it was legal jargon for lying to steal money and property. And if the district attorney gets involved, there's a criminal element here. She asked for my evidence, so I handed her my phone with all the photos and recordings. She said I was smart to save everything. It would take time, she warned, but she would help us. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. It was Lucas Gray from Adult Protective Services. He wanted to schedule a phone intake, introduced by the shelter counselor. I grabbed my notebook. I answered all his questions about Dad's situation, giving him every detail. He said he'd file a case and assign an investigator. It would take time, he explained. They needed to interview many people and gather financial documents. I felt a surge of impatience. I wanted answers now. I wanted Mom and David punished immediately. But Lucas's voice was steady. He believed a thorough inquiry was better than a quick dismissal. I knew, despite my frustration, that he was right. He said someone would call in a week to schedule interviews and to keep documenting everything. Then the bank called. Isabel Stone, from the fraud department. She'd started a case file based on my initial report. She then listed all the paperwork I'd need, a police record, identification, proof the account was for my benefit. Any statements confirming my parents' access was unauthorized. I scribbled everything down, but each requirement felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. Some of the documents were missing. I had no idea how to get the others. Isabel must have heard the anxiety in my voice. She advised me to take it slow. Get what you can, she said, and call me. She gave me her direct number, told me she was my case agent. Later that afternoon, Victor Hall from the VA called. He was a social worker calling about a housing and caregiver program consultation. He also suggested changing Dad's representative payee. He started listing unfamiliar initiatives. Had VASH, caregiver stipends, aid, and attendance. I snatched my notepad again, writing furiously, but he was talking so fast and I was forgetting things. He must have realized because he slowed down, promised to send me everything in writing. He asked when we could meet in person. I looked over at Dad, watching TV on the bed, and a wave of relief washed over me. Someone who knew the system, who wanted to help us. It brought a strange sense of optimism. The meeting was set for the following week. When I hung up, my hands had finally stopped shaking. The next morning, Elena Carter at Legal Aid helped me draft a formal request to Peaceful Rest Funeral Home. I gave her the address of the memorial service Mom had taken me to 12 years ago. Elena said we needed official proof of their services, contradicting Mom's claims. She typed, and I signed the letter on Legal Aid letterhead. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the hotel. Dad watched from the bed as I opened it. The funeral home director's letter confirmed they had provided space for a memorial ceremony that day, but they had no remains for burial or cremation. Their documents showed a 2-hour chapel rental No casket purchase, no burial site, no cremation permission. I read it twice and I felt sick. I knew Dad was alive, but reading that his funeral was an empty performance, it made me feel physically ill. That afternoon, I drove to the downtown police station to file a report. The front desk officer led me to Detective Hugo Larkin's office. He was about 50, with gray hair and glasses pushed up on his forehead. I sat in a plastic chair across from his desk while he opened a form on his computer. I told him everything again. Waking up to cold water, finding Dad alive at Palmer, my drained bank accounts, 10 years of stolen benefits. He just begged me to start over to tell it all. Hugo typed continuously. When I finished, he printed the report, had me check it. He said it would take time to investigate. Financial crimes with multiple parties and government benefits were complicated. But the report number, he said, would help me with the bank and other authorities. He gave me his business card, told me to call if I remembered anything else, or if my parents contacted me. 3 days later, I was sorting files on the hotel bed when I glanced out the window. David's vehicle, parked 3 spaces down, just looking at our room from behind the wheel. My entire body went cold. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands trembled so badly I could barely zip our bags as I started stuffing our belongings inside. Dad wondered what was wrong. I just pointed out the window. His face blanched. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I packed, telling me police were 7 minutes away. David remained in view through the curtain, just sitting there, watching us. When the police finally arrived, David slowly drove off. The cops took a report and told me to record any future interactions. After they left, I sank to the floor, my back against the bed. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. From now on, he said, his voice quiet, we pack our suitcases just in case. The next day, Elena Carter helped me get my old school records from the district office. She said we needed proof of Mom's years-long grieving treatment. A week later, I spread the documents out on the hotel desk. Pages of counseling notes from when I was 7 to 16. Each one had the same diagnosis code: parental loss. My therapist's notes meticulously detailed my persistent trauma over Dad's supposed death. Me, sobbing over missing him, recounting funeral dreams. How Mom had informed the therapist I needed help processing my father's wartime death. The exact same diagnostic code used to bill my parents' insurance for every single session. Reading years of my own profound sadness, described in cold, clinical terminology, felt like reading about someone else's anguish. But it also left a clear paper trail, showing just how long and how purposefully Mom and David had been lying. The week after, Elena issued formal preservation letters. These went to the bank and to my parents' address. In stern legal language, the letters demanded they not erase any data related to Dad's benefits or my account. Elena explained this was standard procedure before suing. Destroying evidence after receiving such a notice could result in extra sanctions. She said the formal language was powerful. We were effectively telling them, we're building a case and we demand you preserve everything. Reading that letter before she mailed it, I felt different. For weeks, I'd been reacting to their actions. Now we were demanding their cooperation. 3 days later, Isabel Stone from the bank called with an update. Their fraud investigation had indeed found a pattern. Years-old transfers from Dad's benefits account directly to Mom and David's joint account. She'd flagged the transactions as suspicious, built a timeline. But she warned me that more data was needed to prove the payments were unlawful. We needed VA paperwork confirming Dad never approved Mom as his agent. We might even need court orders to access their accounts. The bank was investigating, but it would take time. I recorded everything she said in my notes. Each piece of evidence felt like another brick in our wall. The VA then called Dad that same week to interview him. Victor Hall said they were evaluating Dad's representative payee. To ensure he could genuinely convey his preferences, they were interviewing him alone, without any relatives. The VA clinic appointment was the following Tuesday. Victor explained this was standard for pay authority issues. They wanted to know what Dad wanted and who he trusted with his benefits. For the first time in weeks, hope returned. Someone was finally prioritizing Dad's wishes over everyone else's. I helped Dad rehearse, answering the interview questions, trying to manage his nerves. 3 days later, Lucas Gray called. He'd visited Mom and David's residence for the APS investigation. They'd cooperated, claiming to have power of attorney to oversee Dad's hospital affairs. Lucas said they looked prepared with documentation and explanations, but he wanted copies to establish their validity. He warned me that financial exploiters often have legitimate-looking papers. He was investigating to verify their authority. He'd informed me as the inquiry progressed. After hanging up, I felt a surge of frustration. Of course Mom and David cooperated. They'd been lying well for 10 years. The next week, Elena acquired copies of the claimed power of attorney through legal discovery. She called me to her office and spread the document on her desk. Dad had supposedly given Mom power of attorney, right there on the signature line. But even my inexperienced, I saw something strange. The letters were weak, uneven. Dad's signature on his VA records and our applications was distinct, bold. This wasn't it. And the date? 13 years ago, right when Dad was first hospitalized. Elena found even more issues. A fading notary seal. Witness signatures barely discernible. She indicated we might need a handwriting expert to prove it was fabricated, but the paper already looked suspicious. Even without that. The next morning, Dad and I went to the DMV to get him a state ID. Since the hotel was temporary, Victor Hall had helped us set up a VA post office box for official correspondence. We filled out the application. Dad provided his discharge papers and social security card for verification. The clerk processed everything, said the ID would be ready in 20 minutes. We sat in the plastic seats, waiting. When they called his name, Dad walked up to the desk. The clerk handed him a temporary paper ID with his photo. Dad studied it intently. His name, the first address in 10 years that wasn't a hospital or Mom and David's house. Our address. I watched him carefully fold it and slip it into his wallet. Just a piece of paper with his details. But it felt like a small win in a fight we were still very much losing. That afternoon, back at the hotel, Victor Hall called. He asked if I had time to review the VA caregiver program application, and I instantly agreed. Over the phone, he explained what medical data I needed from Dad's Palmer file and which papers required a doctor's signature. The application asked for excruciating details. Dad's daily care needs, his disability, his treatment plan. I checked boxes for medication management, appointment coordination, food prep, emotional assistance. Every inquiry only highlighted the immense weight of my burden. But with Victor's connections, I started the first training session that very night, watching videos about veteran mental health and caregiver burnout. The program even stressed setting boundaries and asking for help, which felt incredibly foreign when I was only 20 and completely clueless. Victor confirmed he had my entire VA portal application and said the approval process might take several weeks, but he'd follow up to keep things moving. 3 days after the shelter counselor referred me, I made my first appointment with Amelia Fletcher at the community mental health clinic. The clinic was a converted house, its waiting area decorated with mismatched furniture and cheesy motivational posters. When she called my name, I followed Amelia to a small, lavender-scented office. She looked maybe 40, wore spectacles, and had a calm demeanor that somehow made the whole space feel safer. She asked what brought me there, and I started talking about my parents kicking me out, finding Dad, the stolen money. Halfway through, I noticed my hands were trembling, and I was talking too fast. She just listened, taking notes, never interrupting or trying to fix anything. When I finished, she asked me how I was sleeping and eating. Poorly, I admitted. She promised to work on coping skills and trauma processing, but for now, she just wanted me to know I had a safe place to talk. The session lasted 50 minutes, but leaving felt like shedding something incredibly heavy. The following week, I sat with Isabel Stone from the bank for a comprehensive interview at the branch. She had printed out every transaction on my old savings account from the last 5 years, underlining them and marking them with sticky notes. Isabel asked who initiated each withdrawal and transfer, what it was for, and if I had consented. I explained that Mom always claimed the money was saved for college, that I never had direct access to the account, and I certainly didn't realize she could just cancel it any time. When she questioned me about my joint account, I told her Mom said it was customary for parents to be on their kids' accounts when I was 13. She meticulously noted everything and then explained the bank's temporary credit fraud guidelines. Even though it was a shared account, the pattern of access and the timing of the final withdrawal, right when I discovered Dad was alive, made a compelling case. She promised to report back in 2 weeks after the Fraud Review Committee looked over everything. Days later, Lucas Gray called again to arrange a DNA test. He stressed that we needed biological proof to completely disprove Mom and David's claims about my status in Dad's case. The results from an approved lab would go into the APS file. I consented, even though it felt wrong. Like I had to scientifically prove I was part of my own family. The next morning, a technician gently swabbed my cheek, then Dad's, labeling the samples with case numbers. It took 10 minutes max. But walking out of that lab, I was furious. 10 years of deceit. And now I had to scientifically prove I was my father's son. Dad was silent in the car, and I knew he felt the same crushing weight of this intrusive confirmation of a simple truth. Back at the legal aid office, Elena Carter updated me. She'd filed an emergency application for interim control of specific accounts, alleging that Mom and David's continued access risked even more asset loss. The application asked the court to freeze those accounts and demand financial reporting during the ongoing investigations. Our hearing was 3 weeks away. Elena laid out the files on her desk and explained everything. She warned me that court was unpredictable, unpleasant. Judges had a lot of discretion. We might not get everything we wanted, but this was our best shot to stop them from concealing or spending more money while APS and the police did their work. I signed the verification forms, and she filed them online. That same afternoon, the funeral home provided even more documents. 3 days later, I opened the hotel envelope. Invoices and contracts for a memorial service. Nothing else. No cremation, no burial, no handling of remains, just a room rental, chairs, and a visitor book. I stared at the papers, trying to reconcile it with the vivid memory of the funeral, the coffin I'd grieved over. The whole thing was a theatrical performance. My mom and stepdad had held a memorial ceremony for a man who was alive, just 20 meters away in a VA hospital. Something inside me snapped. My hands shook with a cold, pure hatred. I left the motel, circling the parking lot and neighboring streets for nearly an hour until my legs ached and my fury finally began to subside. Victor Hall then requested Dad's HUD VSH screening. Based on his service and situation, Dad qualified for housing vouchers and case management for homeless veterans. The VA clinic screening interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. When Victor outlined the procedure, Dad worried they'd think he was too damaged or didn't deserve treatment. That night, I sat with him, rehearsing answers to Victor's likely questions. I told him he'd served his nation, earned this support, and that being honest about his needs wasn't a weakness. We practiced until he could talk about his mental health and housing without his voice trembling. Then, Elena's office received Mom's personal email. Elena sent it to me with a request to call her. I read everything. It was a long, meandering message about sadness, bewilderment, how she'd always planned to tell me the truth when I was older. She blamed her fear of losing Dad, claiming fear drove her awful decisions, said she never intended to harm. The email was pages long, completely devoid of any real acknowledgement or apology for her behavior. Elena called that afternoon. She said it was a textbook non-apology, admitting nothing, avoiding culpability. She had formally informed Mom that all future communication had to go through attorneys. It was a strange comfort, knowing someone was creating a barrier so Mom couldn't influence me anymore. Elena then suggested bringing in a handwriting specialist to analyze the power of attorney signature. She warned me that specialists cost several $1,000s, so we should wait to see if the bank's internal assessment identified the paper as fraudulent first. If their experts found signature issues, we'd have free ammo. I wanted answers right away, but I was learning that legal strategy often required immense patience, waiting for the other side to make mistakes rather than pressing every single issue ourselves. Elena said she'd keep pressing on numerous fronts, and we'd decide on the expert after the bank's assessment. Dad and I started a regular routine to avoid getting lost in our heads. I'd sort his meds into a pill organizer, and we'd take them with breakfast every morning. Then an hour dedicated to paperwork, phone calls, agency follow-ups, organizing documents, emails. After that, a 10 to 15-minute walk around the hotel parking lot. Structure. It made us feel less out of control. Dad's anxiety lessened when he had a daily strategy, rather than just constantly reacting to crises. Some days, I desperately wanted to solve problems faster. The routine felt tiresome, but I was discovering that true stability came from these modest, steady things, not dramatic, sudden discoveries. That Thursday morning, Giovanni from APS called just as I was organizing Dad's meds in the weekly. Pill organizer. He said APS's early examination had confirmed our worries about financial exploitation, and it warranted further investigation. More importantly, it confirmed everything we'd been saying. He clarified it wasn't a final decision, but it gave Detective Hugo Larkin a solid foundation for the criminal case. That formal abuse record would bolster both our criminal investigation and civil actions. After weeks of feeling like I was constantly overreacting, hearing someone official say, "Yes, this happened," was a huge relief. I thanked him, hung up, and just stared at the pill organizer. Mom and David had committed genuine maltreatment, and we had the paper evidence. 2 hours later, Isabel Stone from the bank called. She explained their analysis had detected the power of attorney signature as possibly faked, based on Dad's other paperwork. They were halting Dad's welfare withdrawals while they investigated. We didn't get our money back yet, but it stopped Mom and David from draining even more while we built our case. She estimated another couple of weeks for their full evaluation. Things were moving slowly, but holds were instant and enforced. Dad asked what was going on, and as I explained both calls, I saw his expression shift from perplexity to a flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, the system worked sometimes, instead of just crushing the weak. Elena Carter met us 30 minutes early in the foyer of the county courthouse on Monday. We were there for the restraining order hearing. She said the court would hear both sides, review the police report about David in our parking lot, and decide whether to grant or deny the order. Dad's leg bounced nervously as we passed through security and sat on a bench outside the courtroom. Then David arrived with a cheap-suited lawyer by his side. My stomach dropped. I half thought he wouldn't bother showing up, that he'd just let the order go through. But no, he looked self-righteous, almost aggressive. The bailiff called our case Brooks versus Smith, and we walked into court, us and Elena versus David and his lawyer. The judge asked David's lawyer to present first. He argued David never threatened us, was merely checking on family after a traumatic circumstance, and that we were crazy. Elena stood up. She calmly explained the police complaint, the pattern of harassment, David's appearance shortly after we initiated legal procedures. The judge studied the report for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked at David. "Do you have a valid reason to be in Mr. Brooks' parking lot at night?" David started to ramble about family duties, but the judge cut him off. He issued a restricted order. David had to keep 500 feet away from us for 6 months, based on the evidence of intimidation. We left. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. 6 months felt like protection, but also so insufficient. Elena, however, called it a good win. She said offenses would now result in jail time. The next Wednesday, we headed to Palmer for Dad's VA representative payee interview. A social worker I didn't know escorted Dad into an office alone. I waited for 40 agonizing minutes, checking my phone every 2. Dad emerged, exhausted but okay. They'd asked who would manage his benefits, and he immediately chose me. The social worker called me afterward, said I'd need to finish some training modules and submit documentation. But Dad's clear preference had swayed their decision. She handed me a training booklet and said they'd contact me about the next steps. Everything had to be completed within a month. We thanked her and left. Dad was silent in the passenger seat. Then he quietly said he was afraid I'd think it was too much responsibility and leave him. I assured him I wasn't leaving, that we were doing this together. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. Thursday afternoon, Victor Hall called again. Dad passed the HUD-VSH eligibility screening, he said. We're approved to start looking for a unit. He introduced me to Osto Carney, the housing coordinator. We needed a 1-bedroom that matched program guidelines, and the voucher would cover most of the rent. Osto promised to send me qualifying listings and schedule viewings once I found properties I liked. I hung up and immediately told Dad, we got actual housing, not just hotel coupons. He asked the price. I explained the voucher covered most of it, we'd only pay a tiny fraction. It was our first real stability since everything started. He quieted again. Then I saw him. He was sobbing, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know what to say. I just sat with him until he calmed down. All afternoon Friday, I updated Dad's postal address with every agency on my laptop. Social Security, VA, bank, pharmacy, insurance. Each one had its own form and verification process. Victor Hall had advised me to use a VA PO box as our permanent address until we found stable housing, to avoid any mail issues. With each document I submitted, I felt like I was slowly stripping away Mom and David's power, affecting their access to Dad's information and benefits. My fingers cramped from typing. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. But I kept going. This tedious administrative labor was protecting someone, not through confrontations, but through paperwork. Monday morning, Isabel Stone from the bank called. She told me they were giving me a small, temporary credit to a new student account she'd helped me set up, completely separate from my parents. It was only a portion of what was stolen, and she cautioned it might be reversed if their investigation didn't fully corroborate my accusations, so I should only spend it on essentials. But when that deposit hit on Tuesday, I just stared at the sum for a full minute. This modest amount of money was mine. It couldn't be taken without notice. Some of it went straight to groceries, replacing our lodging voucher food. That night, Dad even helped me make dinner in the little kitchenette. Wednesday, someone claiming to be Mom's cousin posted on social media, saying the family needed to meet to resolve this before it got worse. I read it 3 times, and by the 3rd I could see the manipulation threaded through every word. They stole from us for 10 years, and now I was the one making it worse? Elena Carter's response to my screenshot was swift. We are not meeting with anyone without attorneys present. It made me sad, truly, that family had to function this way, that I couldn't trust Mom's side to genuinely care about us. But sending that message felt incredibly powerful. Elena called again on Thursday. She offered a settlement meeting before launching a full-blown case, explaining that litigation was expensive, long, and that an agreement on restitution might be better than years in court. My first thought was, Mom and David will just make excuses and downplay everything. She agreed that was likely, but advised trying settlement first. If they refused to bargain, we could always sue. I told her to set it up, though I didn't expect much. That Friday, I opened the simple envelope containing the DNA results. I already knew what they would say. The test confirmed with 99.9% confidence that I was Dad's biological son. It disproved any twisted allegation that I wasn't entitled to his care or his rights. Lucas Gray called an hour later, confirming he'd received the findings and was filing them with APS for the official record. Another irrefutable proof of our connection, my legal status. I put the report into our evidence folder and cloud backup. Proof of something I never doubted, but the system had forced me to validate. 3 days after the DNA results, Victor Hall called as I made breakfast in the hotel kitchenette. He said the VA's review of Dad's representative payee modification was pending final approval within 3 weeks. And Mom and David? They couldn't touch anything. Interim holds were placed on the account to prevent unwanted access. Victor said I'd have the legal power to administer Dad's benefits, complete control over the money that was intended to support us all these years. Dad was listening, sitting at the small table. Just after I hung up and told him what Victor said, his hands started trembling. I just held them until he nodded and his breathing steadied. The legal assistant's office hosted the settlement session the next Tuesday. A tiny conference room, scuffed table, flickering overhead lights. Elena sat next to me, laptop open, 3 folders of paperwork. Mom arrived first with her attorney, a middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mom's eyes were red and swollen, like she'd been sobbing in the car. She rushed toward me as if to hug me. I just watched her until she sat down. David arrived 10 minutes late, no lawyer, just sat down and immediately started rambling about how this was a misunderstanding, and we were making him look terrible at work. Elena ignored him. She opened the first folder, revealing bank statements showing Dad's benefits being funneled into their joint account. Mom's lawyer shifted, taking notes. Elena, calm and meticulous, read each document, pointing out dates, amounts, the sequence of Dad's hospitalization and the transfers. Mom frequently interrupted with explanations about how bewildered she was after losing her husband, how she felt she was doing the right thing. David shouted that they had power of attorney, that everything was lawful. Elena simply pulled out the query paper and asked him to explain why the signature didn't match Dad's other signatures on file. The only sound in the room, apart from the flickering fluorescent lights, was David's strangled silence. Something shifted in my chest as I watched Mom grieve and David cycle between fury and defensiveness. I wasn't furious anymore, just drained, ready to move on with Dad. After 2 hours, Mom's attorney proposed reparation, and Elena responded with precise terms. We agreed Mom and David would pay back the stolen monies over time, based on the investigations. It wasn't everything we were entitled to, and there was no criminal acknowledgement. But Elena said it gave us a legal foundation, and we could pursue additional possibilities if they didn't cooperate. I signed where she told me and left without even looking at Mom, who was weeping harder now that she realized I wouldn't forgive her. 2 days later, we had the asset freeze hearing. An elderly female judge reviewed Elena Carter's request. She asked Mom's counsel if he opposed a limited freeze on the disputed accounts. He claimed hardship, but the judge cut him off, concluding the evidence demonstrated a danger of wealth dissipation. Her freeze prevented Mom and David from transferring or concealing money during the investigations. A partial triumph, but a vital protection. I was learning that legal progress was made in small, procedural stages, not TV-style courtroom dramas. As we left, Dad asked if we'd won. I told him we got what we needed. That afternoon, Osto Carney called. He'd found a 1-bedroom HUD VASH apartment near bus lines and the VA facility. I barely slept that night, worried something would go wrong before the screening the next morning. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a simple brick building with a small parking lot. Osto greeted us outside, showed us around, functional appliances, leasing details. White clean walls. The bedroom window let in glorious sunshine. The bathroom even had real water pressure. Standing in that empty living room, My chest finally relaxed after being tight since my 20th birthday. This constant knot of worry and uncertainty, it was easing. Dad double-checked every room, tracing the walls, unable to quite believe it. Osto said we could move in 2 weeks once the final paperwork was processed, so I signed the application on his clipboard. That night, the caregiver program sent an acceptance email, awaiting completion of the training modules. I clicked the web link and started learning about medication management, mobility aid, distress signals. After 3 days of training, I'd get a monthly stipend for helping Dad with daily tasks and medical appointments. It was a small amount, but it was steady income. More importantly, it confirmed that caring for Dad was work, skilled work, not just something I should do for free because he was family. The next week, Giovanni Gray called again. APS had sent Mom and David a preliminary letter of concern. The letter informed them the inquiry had discovered financial abuse of a disabled veteran. He stressed this wasn't a final decision, but it would strengthen the criminal prosecution and civil recovery. I asked what happened next. Giovanni said the DA's office would review the entire report and decide whether to press charges based on the evidence. Move-in day arrived on a Saturday morning. Dad and I rode the bus to the new apartment, our few hotel items in garbage bags. Osto met us with the keys and helped carry the bags upstairs. Once he left us alone, Dad started pacing between the living room and bedroom. What if the VA changes their mind, he kept asking. What if we can't afford it? What if Mom and David find us and cause trouble? His breathing became shallow, and I recognized the signs of a panic attack. I gently led him to the couch and sat next to him, teaching him Amelia Fletcher's therapeutic breathing techniques for counts in, for hold, for out. We did it together until his shoulders dropped and his hands stopped trembling. Then, painstakingly, we unloaded, putting Dad's few clothes in the closet, arranging our donated dishes in the kitchen cupboards, making the empty apartment finally feel like ours. Monday afternoon, the bank inquiry update came from Agatha Stone. She informed me that their internal fraud findings now warranted a greater temporary credit to my protected account. It would cover a large percentage of my lost college savings. She still cautioned that it was provisional, pending final findings, but having that money in my own account felt like breathing after being underwater. I checked the balance 3 times that day just to verify it was real. The next week, Dad had his first appointment with Victor Montez, a trauma-specialized VA psychiatrist who worked in the same building as Dad's other doctors. I sat in the lobby, reading old magazines, watching the clock. An hour later, Dad emerged, exhausted but calmer. In the car, he said Victor was honest about the long road ahead, admitting his military trauma and the psychological damage from 10 years of false hospitalization. But Victor's optimism about Dad's recuperation gave us hope for the first time in a very long time. The following week, I boarded the bus to the community college. I found Cassie Vicker's office on the 2nd floor of the Student Services building. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with a desk buried in forms and a coffee mug that said Deadline Survivor. I told her I was 20, caring for my injured veteran father, and needed to figure out college. Cassie opened the fee waiver program on her computer and clicked through the prerequisites. I told her I could get copies of my high school transcripts, which were still at my previous address. She made a note, then opened a course catalog, showing me a typical first semester for a part-time worker and caregiver. She advised starting with 2 online programs with flexible deadlines. She described how the Disability Services Office could help if Dad had a crisis and I needed extensions. She didn't judge me for beginning late or being unable to carry a full load. My shoulders relaxed. She was helping me build something functional. After we completed the enrollment documents, she filed my fee waiver application immediately, saying it usually took 2 weeks. I left her office with a spring semester course schedule and a campus map with the financial assistance office circled in red. 3 days later, while I helped Dad organize his weekly pills, Elena Carter called. Mom's attorney had suggested Mom and David sell one of their cars to make an initial reparation payment. It would be about $8,000 following the settlement agreement in good faith. I tightened my jaw. Their gestures still felt so manipulative, but Elena was already discussing the terms. She had arranged for the amount to go directly into the restitution escrow account, and they had to submit the bill of sale and proof of deposit within 30 days. Her voice grew hesitant when I asked if they were finally accepting responsibility. She explained they were following the arrangement to avoid legal action, which wasn't regret but compliance. She promised to send me copies of everything once I validated the payment in writing. After we hung up, Dad nodded slowly, holding the pill bottles. He didn't care why they were doing it, as long as the money was returned. 2 weeks later, I noticed David's truck in the parking lot as I was taking groceries up to the apartment. My stomach plummeted. He was just sitting there, motor off, staring at our windows from 50 feet away. I instantly turned around, walked back to the street, pulled out my phone. I called 911 to report a restraining order violation. I gave them David's address and license plate. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and move to safety. From the bus stop around the corner, I watched the parking lot entrance. Within 10 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up behind David's truck. David gestured and pointed, but the police weren't buying it. After a brief conversation, an officer led David to the police car. A second officer arrived, and I told him David had no reason to be at our residence, showing him the restraining order documentation on my phone. The officer confirmed David was arrested for violating the order, and I'd receive a court date. The next week, I watched David try to convince the judge he was just driving through the area. The prosecutor showed the police report, GPS data from the 911 call confirming I was at the apartment complex, and officer images of David's truck parked in our lot. The judge looked at David, stern-faced. "This is a blatant breach of a protection order, Mr. Smith," he said. "Did you understand it was meant to prevent this type of interaction?" David tried to argue, but his attorney grabbed his arm. The court extended the restraining order to a year and warned that any subsequent violations would result in immediate arrest and jail time until trial. For the first time since everything began, I felt like the judicial system was actually prioritizing our safety over paperwork. Elena Carter's reply to my update was a simple thumbs-up emoji and good. The VA letter arrived on Thursday afternoon, a hefty package with official seals. At the kitchen table, I read the first paragraph 3 times before it truly sank in. After the representative payee change, I could legally administer Dad's benefits. The letter provided transition instructions, benefits coordinator contact information, and a checklist. I sat there, clutching the pages, feeling the immense weight of this. Now, I was responsible for Dad's finances. Not Mom, not David, not some VA stranger who never checked on him. I would pay his expenses, supply his meds, fulfill his basic necessities. Though overwhelming it felt, right? After 10 years of exploitation, I was just so happy that someone trusted me to do what was right. I showed Dad the letter in the living room while he watched the news. He read it slowly, then looked up at me with wet eyes, just saying, "Thank you." On the 15th, my first caregiver stipend check arrived. I checked my phone during Dad's doctor's visit and saw the deposit message. I stared at the amount and the description, VA Caregiver Support Program, for a full minute. A few $100s, steady monthly income. Combined with Dad's benefits, which I now managed, we could afford rent, food, and stability without perpetual crises. Dad touched my shoulder when we got back to the car after I showed him the notification. Instead of ramen and canned soup, I bought fresh veggies at the grocery store on the way home. It felt luxurious, even though it was just ordinary food bought by ordinary folks. Isabel Stone called the next week to confirm the initial payment from the car sale had gone into the restitution escrow. She explained the deposit, confirmed Mom's attorney's guarantee. She gently reminded me that my bank's temporary credits were still pending their full fraud investigation. But money pouring back finally felt like real progress. It wasn't full justice, not for everything we lost, but it was something I could point to and say, they're paying penalties. Isabel told me the bank investigation was still underway, but this reparation payment proved Mom and David acknowledged the problem, which strengthened our case. She promised to update me, and I thanked her for everything. That night, Dad and I decided on limits. We vowed not to contact Mom or David without our attorneys, and this time we would stick to it. Mom, David, and any other family numbers I recognized were blocked. In the following weeks, Mom called from several different numbers, but I didn't answer. David's sister messaged me on social media asking to talk, so I blocked her. I deleted David's brother's message, which suggested I was pulling the family apart without even responding. Each time I held that barrier, instead of giving in to shame or curiosity, I felt stronger. Non-engagement gave me a tranquility I didn't know was possible. I could finally breathe without waiting for the next manipulation or disaster. 3 months after waking up to cold water on my face, I was sitting at our kitchen table, organizing Dad's evening pills. The apartment smelled like the cheap chicken and rice I'd baked for dinner, and my laptop was open to my community college curriculum for the online writing class I'd started the week before. In the living room, Dad laughed at a host's comment on a cookery show. I surveyed our limited space, the thrift store sofa, donated dishes in the cupboard, the magnetized VA appointment reminder on the fridge. This peaceful Thursday night with meds, supper, and homework. This was steadiness. Not thrilling or dramatic, just reliable and safe. Nothing is ideal right now, I won't lie. After 10 years apart, we're still in treatment, still navigating legal processes, still learning how to be father and son. Dad still has nightmares and panic episodes, and I'm still angry about our stolen childhood. But the lease on our home is ours. We have food in the fridge, bought with money that can't be stolen. We're building our own future. It's not a happy ending, with everything neatly organized and everyone living happily ever after. It's something better. It's a good start. Have you ever faced something so twisted, so unbelievable, that it shook your entire world? What would you have done if your whole life turned out to be a lie? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what you think.